our presentation begins with a definition of Cloud ERP. Then we're going to discuss why you'd want to move to the cloud versus a traditional on-premise solution. And then if you're committed to looking at a new Cloud ERP, the next step is to look at the right vendors for your company. So we're going to cover all that in our presentation today. Finally, we'll close with a couple case studies of companies that have made this commitment to cloud. So to kick us off, what is cloud? Well, at Ultra and throughout most of the world today, what we're seeing is, cloud's just not on-premise, right? But everybody wants to understand what that means. When we hear the word cloud, it means many different things. It's not just the hardware that's off-site, but it's also the delivery method, how the upgrade happens, and how it's being paid for. So as we get into that, let's talk about a few of the other features of cloud. So the word cloud means many different things. All it really means, though, is that your business and your delivery of the software is not in your building, right? So it's no longer on site. It's not on-premise. The second thing that we see in a true cloud offering is that the software is going to be owned in a software as a service method. So what SaaS means is that you're going to pay as you go, right? You're not going to buy the software up front. You're going to be paying as you go all along for the software monthly and or annually, depending on, or even quarterly, depending on the terms of the agreement with that individual vendor. The next thing that I'd like to get out there is single tenancy is one of the topics within cloud. I know Brett's going to address this later, but the delivery method of single tenant is where the software vendor is taken on the management of the upgrades of the ERP system at their own facility, but there's one copy of the database and one instance of the software running. So it's a single tenant solution. There's one database / instance that's running the software. So then multi-tenancy, which is what NetSuite is very similar, except that what we see is we have multiple companies running the same instance of the software and potentially on the same database as well. So there's walls set up between the different businesses so that obviously you can't see each other's information. So what happens is, though, some organizations try to claim that they're multi-tenant, and really what they have is the software on one piece of hardware. This really isn't true multi-tenancy. So a true multi-tenant cloud solution will not merely share the hardware, but it's also going to share the database. As we get into what cloud is and looking at this slide with all of the different attributes of cloud, we didn't cover all these in the presentation. We just wanted to cover the main ones to kind of shorten this up a bit. But in looking at this slide, when we go from the not cloud attributes, so the things that are in blue, and we move over to the true cloud attributes, in the middle what we see as we move along this continuum is something that we've defined as almost cloud, which is when an ERP vendor offers a hosting service and they take ownership of the upgrade. So what you probably had here, it could be in a SaaS model, you could have purchased it, but what's really happening here is that they're still taking ownership of those upgrades. The big difference then, though, between this almost cloud offering, which is that middle, and what we call true cloud and then cloud 1.0, is that there's a single tenant solution. So really cloud 1.0 is a single tenant offering, which means that the upgrades are going to happen automatically as well for you. So big difference then is between this almost cloud, which is where basically the vendor's hosting it for you and they're doing all the upgrades, and a cloud 1.0, which is what we would call a true cloud solution, is that the upgrades are now mandatory and you're in this cloud environment where everyone's moving along together. Okay? Now, as we go through this, the four highlights here on the slide are the keys. The true cloud is off-site, so the delivery model there. The second thing is that the true cloud is a subscription. And then the third thing that we see, that we define as true cloud, is when the upgrade method is not only by the vendor, and it's usually mandatory. Now, when I say mandatory, it's going to be within a specific time window. It's not, but the opposite of that would be where the vendor comes to you and asks, okay, when would you like to upgrade? So it's a very different scenario. So that's what we deem as true cloud. So one more time, just kind of review that before I turn it over to Brett here. So true cloud speaks to three premises. In fact, the upgrades are not mandatory if you're in an environment that's almost cloud or cloud 1.0, where the vendor is hosting the software for you on their server, which is one database and one instance for the customer. So what we see here, right, is offsite subscription by the vendor and then mandatory by the vendor upgrades. Okay, Brett, I'm going to turn it over to you for an update on cloud from the NetSuite perspective.
Okay. George, thank you. Kristen, thank you for the introductions as well. And I wanted to also thank you, Ultra, for having us join today and presenting together. And good morning to all of the attendees. Okay, so I'm going to touch on the slides that George just presented, and we're going to go a little bit deeper. And hopefully the next few slides will provide you a little bit deeper and more detailed description of the differences between on-premise, hosted, and true cloud. So bear with me, and I'm going to be very deliberate in how I go through these slides, just because I want to make sure that we set the definitions and the differences very clearly, since it's the kind of the basis of this webcast. So as you're considering your options for ERP, it's important you understand the differences between the three. Traditional on-premise, as George talked about, are quickly becoming, systems of the past. On-premise systems typically require the purchase of the physical hardware, which means typically, obviously, a large upfront capital investment from you. On-premise systems are dependent upon your IT resources and can be complex, older technology. On-premise systems require expensive upgrades to newer versions, and the on-premise systems often require additional time and software for security, further complicating your investment and also adding cost to it. As you look at the ERP cloud offerings, it's important for you to consider the differences between the true cloud, as George talked about, and the multi-tenant SaaS offering that NetSuite offers, and what we call the fake cloud, or also known as hosted or the single tenant. Many of the established ERP vendors are now offering the fake cloud or the hosted or single tenant. It's interesting. I have a very unique perspective on the ERP software industry. I was at Oracle for 15 years, and I moved to NetSuite about 3 years ago. So I was able to witness the transformation from an on-premise technology like EBS to Fusion ERP Cloud, which was essentially based off of the EBS technology, and then coming to NetSuite that we'll talk a little bit later in the presentation around an application that was built for the cloud and the benefits of that. Oracle, when they originally released Fusion, released it as a single-tenant architected software. And after trying to deliver it that way for about the first year, they kind of did a reboot and started delivering it as multi-tenant because they started to see the economies of scale from a multi-tenant perspective. Let's see here. I think we can go to the next slide. So again, we're going to talk a little bit more about fake cloud versus real cloud. So if you see here, you've got Gartner noting hosting and application management are not synonymous with SaaS. A hosted application is not the same as a real SaaS, and that's what we oftentimes see in many of our ERP projects. Again, as George noted, the hosted vendors trying to position that hosting service as a true SaaS. Real SaaS is built from the ground up as a multi-tenant architecture. It allows seamless upgrades without losing your customizations. We'll talk about that in a minute as well. Lowering your operating costs and ubiquitous access. Just because you can host an application doesn't mean it's, just because you can host the application doesn't mean that it's SaaS. How do you tell one from the other? Okay, so true cloud software is designed to perform better as a fully hosted solution. Again, we talked about the multi-tenancy, so that's where you want to dig into as well, as far as what kind of access can you gain as well. upgrades and new versions should be delivered on a continual basis as well. It should be fairly transparent to you as the customer. You should not have to re-implement the software as well. That's something that's very common with on-premise and fake cloud as well, that you're looking at from an upgrade. Oftentimes there's a re-implementation process as well. Let's see. Fake cloud vendors typically do not host, manage, or maintain the cloud ERP application. Instead, they turn the responsibility over to someone else, like a partner and or the IT organization at customer to help run those. Typically, what that's going to mean is a fake cloud solution ends up being more expensive to run and less efficient for you. Okay, next slide. Okay. Let's see here. So, in summary, what this slide's saying is, beyond the infrastructure differences of the true and a fake cloud, there's substantial value realization differences, and I know that George is going to talk about that in a little bit as well. The bottom line is that true cloud vendors can achieve substantially better economies of scales, while fake cloud providers try to blur the lines of what you're going to receive. Okay, George?
Right, I don't know if you want to cover the single version focus here, or should I move on?
Well, you know what, let's move on, because I'm going to talk about this pretty much more in depth in a couple of the slides down the line here. We'll talk about that in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. So oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, so let's talk about this one for a second. So customizations isn't a dirty word. So if you recall back in the day with the on-premise solutions, there was this deliberate effort to avoid customizations, because what that meant was, as the ongoing support and delivery of the software, you as the user were going to be held accountable for making sure that those customizations were going to work in the next version, meaning risk and opportunities for the software to break. That's not the case with NetSuite and TrueCloud. We love the word customizations. The beautiful thing about our platform is that with all the customizations, they're maintained and carried forward in future releases, and we are accountable for doing that. With our Suite Success methodology, that's our implementation process and approach, which we'll talk about here a little bit later, you're going to be able to recognize, you'll be able to customize the platform to your business while taking advantage of our industry-leading practices, realizing faster time to value. Okay.
Okay, sorry about that. I think there's a little lag on the slides here. So the next step then to talk about is why cloud. But before we get into that, I just wanted to bring out that last point there. So one of the big differentiators here, we start to look at the vendors that are true cloud vendors, is that ability to have enhancements made to the software, have it exist in a layer where it's not affected by the upgrade. So that's a big challenge for some of the other cloud vendors. So it's great that you brought that up there. So when we talk about, kind of why cloud, well, every one of our decisions, right, as we start to look at things, gets back to the executive team who's going to be concerned. As you move from an on-prem solution to a cloud solution, it's a big change. It's a big change organizationally. And so it's kind of what's in it for them. Well, the obvious first thing that any executive is going to be interested in is, well, is this going to change the spend? In fact, it should save us money. And some of the big areas for savings, right, is the first area. We always look at the staff. Many analysts, Celeste, would suggest cloud's a little cheaper in the first few years, and then after the first few years, it gets more expensive. But the problem is that we're limiting our comparison here on some of the acquisition costs of the future as well. So when we start to look at this, we really want to be honest with ourselves about the true costs. We realize that an internal staff costs are higher when factoring in the training and turnover and support and the very changing applications that we have in support of the organization's ERP needs. So the hardware piece is actually just a side benefit, probably a break even, but the real cost that we've got to be honest with ourselves about is all of that training, and all of the turnover of our staff as they move through their careers. So that's the big savings that we see when we work with our clients. It's not just the upfront cost. The second thing that we like to look at with the executive team is how we're going to reduce the risk of the organization. So once again, many executives believe that cloud computing actually increases the risk, and this really isn't true. And this belief stems from kind of the Fox News effect, right? We hear about, oh my gosh, this major thing happened with a system, and maybe it's one of the email systems or something like that. But if we look at our mid-market company IT staff, right, that staff is much smaller than the larger organization of a NetSuite and an Oracle, whose purpose of being there is to keep your information secure. So the risk is actually less with this larger organization because that's their job. It's their job to keep you up and running. Now, adding or going past that or adding into this are really other effects too that it has nothing to do with how big your organization is or how small, but it's just the fact that people are going to leave your organization. So there is a huge security risk as individuals leave your organization and go somewhere else. They take those keys with them and potentially can get back into your system. So finally, the other thing that we'd like to talk about is the contractual promises, that kind of that SLA, if you will, the service level agreement that all cloud vendors offer. Worked with many, many clients who they have big issues with uptime and availability of the system, which is also a big risk for the organization. So what we see with our cloud vendors is everybody offers a service level agreement, and it's always in the high 90s as far as the availability of the system that they're promising you. Otherwise, you're getting your money back. So that's a big deal when we start to look at some of these systems, is it's actually going to reduce the risk to my organization. Better uptime, security is better. And the last thing and probably most important for cloud, is when we're working with the executive team, the big benefit of cloud computing is not that we're going to save out-of-pocket costs on the hardware staff. But the real benefit can be seen in having the latest look and feel that the millennials and all the new employees require, including accessing the ERP system via their phones. Buying into a full cloud ERP will help limit the need for bolt-ons, as well as the vendor grows, their solution is going to grow with you, right? So also, as the cloud ERP, it's going to be easier to integrate with other cloud applications. So you've got the benefit here going both ways. You've bought into an ERP system that's going to grow with you, and then you also have the ability to integrate with other tools with someone like NetSuite. But the absolute biggest benefit of cloud is that your organization, by definition of true cloud, is going to be concurrent or current with the software, upgrades, or automatic. This enables your team to be current with best practices, avoiding costly upgrades that may never happen years later, ending up with the proliferation of spreadsheets, workarounds. Major reimplementation is kind of sitting out there. So the big benefit is that organizational currency of everything that's happening in the business world today as it's being brought into that system. So Brett, on that, hopefully I teed it up for you there. If you could tell us a little bit more about specifically NetSuite's proposition and value prop within this.
Got it. Okay, thanks, George. All right, so this is a common slide that I think if you've ever been in a software evaluation, you'll see this slide. They call it the Hairball Slide. And so this is the old approach with a best-of-breed type of strategy where you've got a different solution or software vendor for Salesforce. You've got something for your warehousing. You've got a different solution for accounting. And each one of these different solutions and each one of these red lines that's represented here is a representation of additional cost and additional risk. And so NetSuite obviously takes a different approach. So if you want to move on to the next slide here. This is also kind of another depiction of that. You've got fragmented data from each system. The systems are siloed. You've got different user interfaces. There is broken workflow. And probably most importantly, there's different versions of the truth because the data resides in different silos. That's the old way. So let's take a look at the way that NetSuite's approaching it.
Well, Brett, well, next part is how to evaluate the vendors, and we're going to get into some of those slides for you on how you guys are approaching it. So from our perspective, then, we've talked about what the cloud is and why we should go forward with cloud. Now, the next point is, how we should go about finding the right people to work with. At Ultra, we offer 5 basic guidelines for legacy transformation projects. First of all, this is a journey that you're on to be simpler and faster to help make your project a success. The focus is on getting alignment up front where you want to go tomorrow, right? Is your business growing? What are the new business models that the organization will be taking on in the next 5 to 10 years? So the whole point of cloud is we're buying into this vendor for the long haul. We're not looking to replace it. The second is to map the current state of the business process, and to get educated on best practices and then build that future state process. The reality is that your businesses and the process really never were designed from the ground up, right? They evolved over time. Now's your chance to start over and redesign your processes with new technology to better meet the needs of the business today and in the future. The third thing we like to bring forward is consider your business model. Are you a distributor? Are you in the service industry? Are you a process manufacturer? Are you a discrete manufacturer? These are different business models that'll drive a much shorter list of vendors that are appropriate for your business that you should be looking at. The fourth thing that should happen then is to bring in the vendors and see the software, right? So ask them to demonstrate their ERP with the data that you have, at least a little bit of it, not all of it. You're not going to give them 100 different customers. Give them 2 or 3 customers, 2 or 3 items. Have them show your business model in their software. And then lastly, of course, as part of the evaluation, you want to evaluate the implementation team of the vendor, which also is a big selection criteria. So let me go on to the next slide to talk about that a little further. We talk about 5 factors now. So there was 5 steps in evaluating ERP. Now there's 5 factors or 5 things that you should really score the different vendors on. We talk about the vendor and feature function, right? Well, every ERP evaluation begins with this. Do the vendors offer a cloud offering that supports the function of your organization? How are these features and functions going to improve your business process and drive to best practice? And of course, a purchase of a new ERP will consider cost and contracts, right? So what's the first-year cost? What are the 5-year costs? When you're evaluating something like this, you really need to be looking out at least 5 years. And how do the costs compare with what you're doing now? This is where we need to get back to being honest with ourselves and what's the real cost of the employees that we have today that are keeping track of our existing systems. So that's when you're going to see the return. In the next few slides now, I think this is where Brett's going to address some of these end user technology advantages and the specific needs of your business model. So Brett, I'm going to turn it back over to you for a couple more slides here.
Thank you. Okay, so thanks, George. All right, so this depiction is the opposite of what we just talked about, like the opposite of the hairball. This is giving you a single data source with the NetSuite solution around providing ERP, your back office, financials, supply chain, warehouse management, HR, et cetera, as well as the front office applications of e-commerce and CRM. With our Suite Success methodology, again, that we'll talk about here in a few minutes, we are going to provide leading practices based on our 40,000 plus existing customers. Of those 40,000, about 3,000 are distribution and about 2,000 are manufacturing. So we use those leading practices of those customers that we already have in the cloud to help implement and define the implementation and methodology for our new customers. We've already built in thousands, I think it's 3,000 hours of pre-configuration that is part of our implementation methodology, as well as included with KPIs, dashboards, predefined roles, and workflows. So we're really starting you instead of at the goal line or the 0, at the goal line or the 20-yard line, we're really getting you started at the 50-yard line. Okay, next slide. So George is going to build this out. So each one of the verticals at NetSuite has their own stairway. I'm going to show you both the wholesale distribution and the manufacturing very quickly because they're similar in how we approach the the implementation primarily and the deliverable of, trying to sell what we deliver and deliver what we sell is very important. So through the thousands of implementations that we've done, particularly within wholesale distribution and in the manufacturing industries, we understand the unique challenges that your businesses face. As the pace of change accelerates, many distributors and manufacturers have to rely on outdated and disjointed on-premise ERP systems like we talked about. As you look to scale your business and position yourselves for the future, that's the question. What's the best way to get there? So we've tried to, with this stairway, depict and define what is the best way. What are the steps? What are the most logical and most risk-mitigated approaches to making sure that we're successful? So again, having worked with thousands of manufacturing and distribution customers, we identified the necessary steps to build a scalable business around the ERP systems and the ERP systems around your business. Changing software systems is a major decision, and making the right systems is just one piece of that decision. Obviously, we got to make sure that the implementation and the methodologies are appropriately aligned as well. The distribution and the manufacturing evolutions, or the stairways, will help you implement a technology strategy to position you for the future. It kind of shows you what we're going to do in phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 over the next several years of building out a potential ERP project for the enterprise. Oftentimes, the implementation is the point of failure, not the software. So we've got to make sure that the software, the implementation, and the businesses are aligned with those methodologies. With the unified and phased approach here, it allows you to essentially succeed while scaling your business. So I'm going to touch real briefly on some of these different steps. In the spirit of time, I know we've got about probably 20 minutes because we want to save some time for questions as well. But let me kind of touch on some of the primary steps here. We'll kind of move through this quickly, so bear with me. So if you look down at the very bottom, that first stage, or the first step of the stairway, is remediate. This kind of addresses the shortcomings of the legacy systems and the manual processes which would prevent visibility into inventory and orders and those types of issues. The limitations lead to inconsistent customer care, revenue loss, and under-delivering. This also has a detrimental effect on audits and the close process, which are cumbersome and, as we all know, very stressful. So during Remediate, NetSuite focuses on establishing your financials while also providing you a holistic view of your customers, inventory, and orders, and delivering an overall operational business intelligence. This is kind of the first step of essentially replacing what you've got with better. It's replacing or establishing the critical foundations to move forward with your ERP and with your business. So as you go up, the next step is expand, and we'll tackle some of the difficulties in expanding into additional channels while also delivering consistent customer experience. So this is kind of where your CX experience and CRM falls into this step. The third step is innovate, and that aims to address the inefficiencies and the inaccuracies of orders and the lack of visibility to your supply chain. And during the innovate stage, supply chain and order management is enabled through supply chain automation and barcoding functionality. As we move up the stairway, we come to enhance, and enhance focuses on improving the poor use of capital caused by inefficient inventory utilization, as well as enabling you to direct fulfillment and service across sell and upsell. And it establishes warehouse management and field service. And then lastly is transform, and transform state sets to solve the lack of insight into customer behavior and the absence of closed loop ROI, which obviously would restrict your growth. Transform focuses on more around innovation strategies like BI, marketing automation, price and margin management, those kinds of things. So for each one of our verticals, we have a very similar stairway. And if you want to jump to the next slide there, George, you can see a very similar depiction for what we have for our manufacturing prospects and customers as well.
Yeah, I think I'm there already.
Okay. You know, I lost connection of the WebEx, so hopefully it reconnects here. So you might have to give me some guidance here on which slide we're on. My apologies.
Well, we've got the manufacturing slide up now, so I'm moving on to risk factors. And this is, so at Ultra, we talk about 5 factors that we should look at different ERP vendors with. And the first 2 are feature, function, and cost. And I think that first slide you demonstrated, Brett, was spot on for what we call end user technology with our customers. And that is a huge feature, huge function, drives many, many of the selection efforts. Can't tell you how many times that we get into an effort with a client and it happens and they say, you know what, I just like the way this one looks and feel. I think our organization is going to adopt this much better. So the look and feel, the KPIs, the dashboards, all things you had listed off there, which we're not able to, we don't have time to show everything today, but all those features are great. Those are the things that really our clients are looking for. And so that's all part of that first step, you know, the feature function evaluation. Obviously, we're concerned about cost. The next 3 factors then that we talk about in these 5 factors are all related to risk. The first factor underneath risk, or the third factor overall, is really the risk of the company that you're buying from. And at Ultra, you know, we look at this and it's really how big is this organization? The interesting thing is there's really only a half a dozen or so vendors that are $1 billion+ in annual revenues. And then there's a couple that are in the middle, and then everybody else is really under 50 million. So if we look at an organization like an Oracle and a NetSuite within that, and saying there's $1 billion of revenue versus someone else that's at 50 million in revenue, that's a big risk, right? So where is that $50 million company going to be tomorrow? Are they going to be able to keep up with technology? The next thing that we talk about is the technology platform risk as well. So within that, we also put in the whole idea of cloud computing. If you're working with a vendor today, or you're looking at someone today that isn't thinking about cloud or isn't already there, or at least have a plan to get there, then that's a big risk, right? So what are they doing with their technology? What's the platform? What's the go-forward offering? Because if they're not there, then they're not going to be able to get there, especially if they're a much smaller organization. And then the 5th factor and the 3rd risk factor here that we always ask our clients to look at, and I alluded to this earlier, which is it's the implementation and support. It's the 5th step in the process, and it's the 5th factor that really needs to be evaluated. So many times we find with our clients, they've got a great offering in front of them at an awesome price. The company is amazing that they're buying from. The technology is spectacular. It's spot on with what's going on in the market. But if we don't have the right partner, the right implementation methodology, right, now our implementation itself is at risk. So we could have the best project ever, and if we don't get it up and running, we failed. So what we find many times in our selection is that at the very end, when we're down to 2 vendors that are neck and neck and really close, it's this implementation and support, and that organization that you're really going to be partnering with is the real deciding factor in our efforts. And so, Brett, the next slide here that I've teed up for you then is really to start talking overall. It's the NetSuite philosophy side here with the slide, with Suite Cloud Platform, the functionality, One World, and industry. And I think this slide talks to those first couple of risks of company and technology. The next slide after this is Suite Success, which talks to implementation.
Okay, so George, I've got my notes here, and I can talk to the platform, and then we can move to Suite Success. So I'm good. You just got to have to hit the slides for me. Okay. So this you're looking here is really the secret sauce, or part of the secret sauce for NetSuite is our Suite Cloud Platform. And like I alluded to on one of the earlier slides, is NetSuite's built on a single data source, and it's on an Oracle database. And it's really our unified data model is the key to being able to enable our BI and our suite and the deliverable value from our suite. It allows you to report and analyze your entire business end to end. It's real time, and so there's no need to build complex data warehouses with multiple moving parts and using other third parties to help enable that. The unified data model allows customers to define who is able to view, analyze, and transact across the enterprise, and it also allows you to help manage the security by functional area, fields, subsidiaries, and sites. In other solutions, that's all falling on you as the user, but with NetSuite, you get it inherently. So that was what I wanted to talk to you on that slide, George.
On Suite Success.
Okay, so Suite Success has changed everything for NetSuite. So if you go back to pre-Suite Success, or even just a few short years ago, when you embarked upon an ERP project, the software company and the implementation partner would show up and say, tell us about your business. And they would do these discoveries. And for many, many years, when I was doing the traditional ERP on-premise types of sales cycles and projects, the customers would say, well, haven't you done this before? Don't you know our business well enough to get a start? Well, NetSuite took that to heart, and about 4 years ago started this project with Suite Success. So it's a culmination of a multi-year effort that essentially takes the 20 years of our industry-leading business practices, our 3,000 WD customers and our 2,000 manufacturing customers, and takes the leading practices and builds it into this pre-built prescriptive implementation where we would, I think, propose to our customers, we know your business from a manufacturing or from a distribution perspective to about 80%. We don't know your secret sauce. We don't know the things that make your business your business. So that's the 20% that we fixate on and make sure that we get that right. What does that do? Well, let's go to the next slide. So this should be the heart slide, George. So
yeah, we're there.
What we've seen, okay, perfect.
Yep.
So what we've seen over the last 2 years is a 60% faster implementation process. 90% of our Suite Success implementation customers are referenceable. This slide's about a month or two old because now we have, I think, 450 Suite Success customers, but we've only had to do 4 change orders. And the implementation costs are about 20% less. So at the end of the day, faster time to value, lower total cost of ownership, and Suite Success for your ERP project. Again, this methodology and this approach started with our wholesale distribution vertical about 2.5 years ago or 3 years ago, and we've rolled this out across all of the verticals here at NetSuite over the last several years because of the success of the methodology and the approach. So we're really excited about it.
So that hits right at our 5th point there, Brett, where we're talking about having the right methodology, the right partner chosen to go forward with as a business. And to that end, I think we have a couple case studies that you were going to mention. And finally, just a few more notes. So why don't we move? I think we're ready to move into those case studies as well. Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. The next slide we have here is the 40,000 organizations, kind of what we call the NASCAR slide of all of your customers here. I don't know if you want to talk to that at all.
Oh, I think that's just representing, so NetSuite's customer base represents or is inclusive of startups, pre-revenue, all the way up to multi-billion-dollar entities. And it's the same software, it's the same version, and it's hosted. And most of the, as we're saying now, moving forward, they're implemented in very similar fashions. I think the point of this is scalable and reliable, and again, based on the Oracle database and technology.
Great. Okay. Next thing, customer success story with a sourcing partner.
Sourcing partners. Okay, this is a great story. These guys are down in Dallas. I visited them probably about 3 or 4 months ago, actually, on a customer site or a reference visit for a prospect. And sourcing partners hosted us down there for a visit to see what they've done with NetSuite and how they did it. So as it says here, they had a Microsoft Dynamics an Epicor system that they had been on for, I think, about 10 years. And they jumped in with NetSuite, and they came in on time and under budget in about 95 days. That is both actually faster than the average implementation for a mid-market or a small project, which is typically about 120 days is the average of what we're seeing for kind of a core system. The great story about this, too, is the team there at Sourcing Partners embraced this in such a way that the warehouse manager who had been at Sourcing Partners right out of high school started learning NetSuite. and started learning how to work as more or less as a system administrator for the NetSuite systems. Now this young man who started out as the warehouse manager now is essentially running NetSuite, one-man show at Sourcing Partners, and it just goes to show the efficiencies and really the ease of use of the system. So that was a really cool story for these guys. Can jump to the next one. Is that one Dyla? Yeah. So, yes. Okay, this one, Dyla they're a manufacturing customer, and they were coming off of QuickBooks, and we won. We were competing against SAP, and SAP had, I think, a more of a traditional approach and methodology suggestion. We came in 90 days for their go live. SAP was proposing about a 6-month implementation process. If you see the quote down at the very bottom, that's probably the best type of success story we can talk about and display here. The CEO is talking about their 500% year-over-year growth, which we hope NetSuite helped enable that. We would never obviously contribute that all to NetSuite, but they feel that without NetSuite, they couldn't have kept up with that kind of growth and trajectory. So 2 really great stories. Dyla again coming off of QuickBooks, and Sourcing Partners coming off of Microsoft. Great.
Okay, so I want to talk about additional resources we have before we get into questions and answers. But I did want to accentuate one of the things that you mentioned there with respect to Suite success from an Ultra perspective. And you alluded to it when you talked about competing versus SAP. What we're seeing in the cloud offerings and the true cloud solutions is a much different implementation approach. What has happened is the product itself, and I apologize for this word, has been SaaSified to a level. You can go just about anywhere in NetSuite and the different cloud offerings and understand exactly what's going on within the software. It's a much different approach to implementation with all of that context-sensitive help that's offered. So it helps to shorten the cycle of the implementation. What we're saying is half. Our typical cloud ERP implementation is around half the cost of a typical on-premise. I know Brett was quoting some numbers on how much better they've gotten, but we're seeing just overall cloud versus on-prem, probably half the implementation dollars. So that's a huge savings, especially in that first 3 years. Okay, so I wanted to hit that point because I hadn't earlier. As we move forward here, a few more things. We have some additional resources. You can see this on our website. Getting the maximum ROI of your ERP is in January. We have a Cloud ERP webinar in February, and then we have a food processing magazine that we're doing with them in February as well. I think that's it from this perspective. We did want to highlight our NetSuite and Ultra white papers. So there's a white paper for NetSuite. I think, Kristen, you're going to send this out to everybody, or you just did, which is called Shining a Light on the Clouds. Awesome title. And then our 5 steps to developing cloud ERP transformation plan and selecting a partner. So a lot of what we just talked about today is in a full white paper from Ultra as well. Next is questions. So I'm going to open it up. Kristen, I think I'm giving the ball back to you to ask questions of Brett and I. Can't hear you yet, Kristen.
Apologize. I was on mute. So we've got a quiet crowd here today. I've got one question. I believe it's for George. If anybody else has any more questions, it's not too late to submit those. And the question is it possible to have an apples-to-apples evaluation with an on-premise and a cloud vendor?
Great question. Love it. Yes, we see it all the time. We're kind of in a transition right now where some of the vendors that we're looking at with our clients are on-prem still, and some of them are in the cloud. The on-prem ones are usually moving to cloud, but they trust their on-prem solution. The the only real, I mean, there's obvious advantages as you look at the cloud offering, as we've talked about, from a usability perspective, where you're going in the future, and that'll affect your 5 factors and how you score them there. Feature function, though, just kind of how do I enter a customer order, how do I enter a manufacturing order, a purchase order, those types of things, order to cash, procure to pay. Those types of things should be pretty seamless between the two from a comparison perspective. I'm not saying that the software will perform the same. That's all up to the vendor. So at the end, it's really the cost that's the harder thing to get your arms around. So this is where you really have to be fair to everybody in the situation. We actually have a grid that we pulled together that talks about the on-premise cost as well as the cost of the cloud offering, right? So there are two, SaaS model versus buy it all up front. If you're hosting it somewhere else, you got to have all those hosting costs involved for that. Maybe it's not on-prem, maybe you're going to take it off-site and have someone else host it for you. But then you also need to include the cost of your staff to maintain the system. We're usually seeing 2 people in our mid-market customers, someone that's 75 million, 100 million in revenue. We're seeing at least 2 people that you're able to take out of that from a maintenance and support perspective that you're basically giving over to the cloud vendor like NetSuite. So if you put that in there and then look at it over 5 years, right? Because year 1, cloud's going to look amazing. And then, but by year 3, those numbers kind of cross. So if you but then when you put the people element in, what we're seeing is that the number all of a sudden makes a lot of sense. And then when you go out 5 to 10 years and you say, hey, I don't have to do another upgrade, that's when the real savings comes in, just kind of pure out-of-pocket savings, not counting any of the other value of being current or all those other things. So other than the cost justification and comparing the two, which is harder, everything else should be fairly straightforward. The cloud vendor might win a little bit more in technology, but that just is what it is.
Thanks, George. And we haven't gotten any more questions in, and I was curious if you had any questions for Brett on NetSuite's offering.
Yeah, Brett, I guess just throwing one out there for you. What are you seeing? What's new? How are you guys changing as far as the markets you're going after? Kind of what's the new thing at NetSuite today? I know Suite Success is fairly new. You announced it last year at the user conference, but anything you can give us some insights into prior to this year's user conference?
Yeah. So Mark Hurd, who's the president of Oracle, is enamored with NetSuite's vertical strategy and how effective it is by focusing on an industry. So what we're going to do is double down, and we've already started that, on our industry expertise. So what we're going to be doing, and what we've kind of started doing over the last year and a half now, is focusing on micro verticals. So what we mean by that is within manufacturing and distribution, one of our top micro verticals was food and beverage. It was an area that was a little bit more specific that we've had some great success in. So we started a sales team. We've started a Suite Success methodology, and we've started with content, training our SCs, training our professional services teams to be more specific in the food and bev industry, or micro vertical, I should say. The next one for manufacturing and distribution is potentially looking like industrial supply. That is one of our top micro verticals as far as customer success that we've had, and potentially beauty and home goods is on the horizon as well. And then on the retail side, we have focused on apparel and footwear. So that's probably the most important strategic, I guess, direction that we're going in the next year and a half and forward, is making sure that we continue to be the proficient experts within the micro vertical industries within our verticals.
That's great, because especially when you look at a more rigorous selection process that that we at Ultra recommend, it's that micro vertical focus on the feature function side of things anyway that really wins, and that's awesome that you're headed there. That's good news. I don't have anything else, Kristen. Brett, do you have anything else you'd like to mention, or where are we at? No,
I would mention one quick item. Next month, the 13th through the 15th in New York City. We have our Suite Connect, which is a big conference for NetSuite out on the East Coast. So if you're interested, you can send us a request and we can get you information on that conference. Again, that's in New York City, the 13th through the 15th. But other than that, thank you.
Who's that conference for again?
It's for all NetSuite prospects and customers.
Awesome. Okay, Kristen, what's next?
All right. Well, we don't have any more questions, so we'll end about 5 minutes early here. So that concludes today's webinar. From all of us here at Ultra, wanted to thank our attendees for attending, our hosts today, George and Brett, and NetSuite for joining us today. We wish everyone a great rest of your week, and we will see you at the next webinar. Thanks so much.